Hello, everyone. We're really pleased that so many of you are actually attending this virtual seminar. So this seminar is focused on going the extra mile, which is a unique project in Gloucestershire, where the leading organization is the Gloucestershire County Council and the managing organization is the Gloucestershire Gateway Trust. And the whole presentation will be focused on a very unique and bespoke evaluation that is an ongoing evaluation of the project that started in 2016. And I'm very glad that we've got most of the people who are involved in the project present here. The presentation will be done by Leonie Burton and Professor Paul Courtney. And without further ado, I'll hand over to Leonie.
Thank you very much, Katerina, and welcome everybody. Apologies we haven't got any mince pies because obviously we're online. It's a bring your own this morning. So unfortunately, if you're not organised like me, then you haven't got mince pies. But really nice to see you all. Have you got the presentation, Paul, to bring up on screen, if that's okay?
Yeah, I shall do that now.
Thank you. So most of you know Paul and I, so I don't think we need to talk any more about ourselves, but I'll let you know how we're going to cover our presentation this morning. So if you move to the next slide, Paul.
Why isn't it doing it?
It's making a funny noise. Our plan is that we're going to talk to you today a little bit about the context of GEM, because not everybody will have heard of the project or will know very much about it. So apologies if you have already had an introduction to GEM and you know a little bit about it, so just bear with us. And then we're going to focus specifically on evaluation and monitoring within the GEM project, looking at particularly the methods that we've chosen and why. And then we'll split into two areas of the evaluation and look at the process evaluation findings and the outcome evaluation findings. And then we will spend some time just thinking about considerations for GEM going forward and next steps for the evaluation and look at any questions. As Katerina has already mentioned, a lot of our team are with us on the Zoom call today, so that's great. And I'm also pleased to welcome Jason from the Gateway Trust as well. So welcome on board. Thank you. Next slide, please. So first of all, the GEM project stands for Going the Extra Mile, and it's a social inclusion project which is aimed at helping people to overcome the challenges to employment and move them closer into work, and that includes social self-employment. There are three different groups of stakeholders involved within GEM, and I'm just going to spend a little bit of time explaining each of the different sets of stakeholders just to give a little bit of context. So within the project, we refer to the people who benefit from the project as participants. So if you hear me using that sort of terminology, that's who we're referring to. And GEM participants are supported through the project to work with local services in their communities to help them to achieve their desired outcomes, whether that is to get into work or to do more training with a view to them getting into work. And one of the things that's central in the GEM project is that everybody is unique and has differing needs, different requirements, and needs different support to take that step into work, employment, education or training. So the particular group of individuals that we're working with are people who are hard to reach individuals with complex needs and are a long way from the labour market. They may have multiple needs, and examples include things like mental health, addiction, homelessness, a history of offending, people who have caring responsibilities. They may have physical or learning disabilities. And we're working as well with people across the whole of the Gloucestershire LEP area, but with a particular focus on those who live in areas of disadvantage where, for example, the unemployment rates might be higher than the English average, or they may be suffering particular instances of socioeconomic disadvantage. In terms of the partners on the project, this is a really unique project in a county because it brings together 46 local delivery partners from the community and voluntary sector. And they all collaborate together. And the thing that's unique, they all have a post that they have funded by the project called a navigator developer. Sometimes we call them NavDevs. And these people act as a guide, a coach, a mentor, and a support to the individuals who access the services. And the GEM project makes full use of the partners' resources to make sure that the project has, the full effect that it can. And also, we also try to work really closely with partners to really bring about improvements in terms of sustainable practices. And we'll talk a little bit more about green impact as we go through. So then we have our third set of stakeholders, and these are the employers. The central management team in GEM have 2 opportunity hunters, and they make a very strong connection with employers in the county so that they can bring to the table a whole host of really great opportunities for the participants to access. So we've got some interesting job titles in the project. So listen out for opportunity hunters and navigator developers as we go through. And finally, just to say really that obviously none of this would be possible without the funding that's come from the National Lottery Community Fund and the European Social Fund in partnership. So because we have that sort of element of joint funding, we do also have some quite kind of key measurements in terms of paperwork that we keep track of. So that's also been something that we've worked hard with partners around as well. Okay, so next slide, please, Paul. So Katerina has already mentioned that the project lead partner is the Gloucestershire County Council, and that the Gloucestershire Gateway Trust is the management organisation who have the responsibility for the day-to-day running of the project, and Jason Dunsford is the project manager. The university's role is that we've been in a very unique and a very privileged position with the GEM project, in that we have actually been involved in the project since the beginning, and we co-wrote the bid back in 2016. So the project planning stages began with the launch of the Programme Development Fund, and it brought together at that stage about 150 different voluntary sector organisations and the public sector to really discuss how Gloucestershire wanted to respond to the call. Subsequently, we developed a development group, and we then looked more sort of strategically at where there were linkages and where there were gaps in Gloucestershire. And then we worked really closely to sort of develop a very strong model, a very strong proposal, which really came very much from Vicky at the County Council, along with the Gateway Trust, from Mark Gale. And also that model and that proposal really took on board a lot of the feedback that we'd had from the grassroots organisations that took part in that development work, and we took the sort of experiences that those organisations had day to day with the target participants to really inform that model. And the role really that the university brought to all of that was to kind of wrap around the project idea a bit of a sort of theoretical framework about how the project might be able to measure the outcomes of successes and to actually measure indicators for change. And the indicators for change for each of the outcomes were devised by the external evaluation team, drawing on expertise of capturing and measuring social value. And Paul will tell us a little bit more about that in a little while. Paul, next slide, please. So at the heart of the GEM project is this participant journey. And this is where we have a participant working really, really closely with their navigator developer, and their NavDev helps to open up many opportunities to enable them to take forward the ambitions that the participant has, and also to help them to resolve barriers that might be holding them back. And these can be extremely varied, you know, resolving financial issues, health and housing issues, for example, which you wouldn't necessarily traditionally think might be involved in this sort of work. And not surprisingly, really, the relationship between a navigator developer and their participant involves really high levels of trust. And navigators and developers work really, really hard to establish this by particularly providing really regular contact and being a consistently reliable person in the participant's life. One of the things that always strikes me every year is how well this works. And this year, all participants that I spoke to, in fact, had commented that their navigator developer provided them with a really excellent, amazing service. So one lady I spoke to said that meeting her navigator developer for the first time was a really big deal for her, because previously she had felt so isolated. And the perception from many of our participants is that the navigator developer gives them a lot of help and opportunities, but also gives them an enormous amount of emotional and psychological support. So this is a quote from a participant who said, "The project is very good at scaffolding. I've been very impressed with the contact over lockdown. It makes it easier to know that there is somebody there and that I'm not judged." So one of the results of this perceived support by the participants is that it can lead to loads of really positive outcomes. And we'll talk about that when we look at some of the findings later on. Next slide, please. So here's our team. We've had a few changes over the years, so this isn't exactly everybody that's currently working on it, but you've met Paul and I. Colin's here today as well, who works really closely with Paul on the outcomes side of things. Previously in the past, Wendy's worked really closely on the process evaluation work. Isabel has provided fantastic support across the team, and also is leading on our green impact work for us. Ab Gardner, who works in the School of Media, has come in the last year to do some really very interesting inclusive evaluation work looking at digital storytelling. We'll tell you a bit more about that. And Fahima is recently in the team this year as well, who's doing an amazing job bringing in lots of actual evidence as well from both process and outcomes evaluation. So was previously a participant on GEM. So that's really great to have her in our team, and is also on the call. Next slide, please, Paul. Here's a bit of a diagram about our evaluation cycle. So we undertake this every year. We look at all of our information around the process side of things, and we also conduct a sort of an examination analysis of all of our outcomes data. But one of the things to mention is that originally when we first set out at the beginning of the project, I think we felt like these were sort of two very, very distinct and separate ways of working, which they are. But in actual fact, when you bring together the data and you look and you analyse and you start thinking about what this is actually meaning, they just enmesh, and that it all becomes part of a really useful sort of joining up, if you like. Thanks, Paul. So this is the little bit that I've been leading on. So the formative process evaluation is very much linked to planning, management, the delivery of the project, and the extent to which the planned activities are carried out. So ultimately what we're trying to gauge is the project on track, and is there any sort of changes in terms of how it's set up to help improve that. So this is really important that we work really, really closely with the GEM management, and we very much view ourselves as internal to the project. This is not as an external. We're very sort of bought into GEM succeeding. So all of this is very kindly and friendly sort of feedback to try and improve and make the project as good as it can be. Next slide. So as I said, we're looking to see if any changes are needed at the project, and we're also, as part of that, we do look at how people's lives have changed as a result of GEM. So ultimately some of the process evaluation does start to then sort of lean into some of the outcomes evaluation work. Next slide. So when we're speaking with our different stakeholders, we're looking at asking, you know, what is the difference that GEM is making? What's working particularly well at the moment? Is there things that could be changed, and what are the challenges? And is it on track? Next slide. So there are a range of people every year that I speak to when I do my evaluation cycle, and some years we have different focuses, but we generally try to make sure that we're getting a really good geographical spread and that we are hearing from everybody. So I always speak every year to participants, to the navigators, to the actual delivery partners themselves, to speak to the managers in those organisations, to liaise with the staff team, to talk to the monitoring evaluation steering group, to speak to the operational management group, the opportunity hunters, and anyone from the sort of wider sort of GEM community. So there's a lot of people to talk to and a lot of people to consider. And you know, obviously we do have different methods of how we get that data. So if you want to go to the next slide, Paul. So sometimes it might be just looking at project information, it might be conducting interviews, attending focus groups or setting up focus groups. It might be looking at feedback from meetings, and we also have conducted peer evaluation, and we've built into the project creative and inclusive methods. One of the things with the process evaluation that we Mark sort of found out quite early on as we were doing our theory of change event was because of the complexity of the people we would be working with and their complex needs, it wouldn't necessarily be that all of the methods would fit, and we need to think of quite creative ways that we could gather our data. We coined a sort of term, well, Wendy did, which was deep hanging out. So particularly when we're conducting interviews, you know, if you're staring into the eyes of somebody, that can be quite an intensive experience. Whereas if you're sitting down next to somebody and doing some gardening with them, or you're whittling a stick in the woods with them, or you're at an art club with them, or you've just gone to an event and you're all wandering around with a vol-au-vent or whatever, that sort of sitting side by side style of conversation, deep hanging out, can sometimes elicit much more natural conversations and much more sort of deep conversations, I think, and you can really kind of get to more interesting research data. So we, as far as possible, we try to do that throughout our process evaluation research, but that's not been possible this year in 2020. So I have had a lot of one-to-one and group interviews on Zoom, which in some cases has just worked really well, but in some cases the participants have wanted the screen off and just, it's been a bit more tricky. So yeah, various things with 2020 that have been difficult, but generally I've found it okay this year. So we're going to look a little bit at the findings now, but just a note of caution really, there's only really so much time that we have on a meeting like this. So all I'm going to be telling you is really headline things, and it's a bit of a shame really, because if you read any of these reports, we've got some brilliant quotes, and actually what the participants say themselves is more powerful than anything I can tell you. So if you want to know more, do please have a look at those and have a read through. So we've got the reports for the full evidence. Okay, so just a general feedback really, what a joy it's been to be an evaluator on GEM. So from sort of 2017 right the way through to 2020, we just have very positive feedback about the project, and that it's been overwhelmingly highly valued, not only from the participants, but also from the people working on the project and the organisations that are supporting it. So as that participant basically said there, I feel like I can lean back and I'm not going to fall, says one participant. And really, you know, that's incredibly true. The NAV devs are very much there to sort of be a sort of a net and to support. I think that comes through quite strongly whenever I conduct interviews. So in a bit more detail, if you can move to the next slide, please, Paul. At the heart of the project, I mentioned about this relationship, this intensive one-to-one support that the project affords is really valued by by all of the people involved, so the delivery partners, the navigator developers and the participants alike. So there's recognition really about the difference the way that GEM operates is, and it has this feeling of being connected, part of a community, and being treated in a really humane way, which particularly for people with mental health issues can be quite an essential component. And many participants that I've spoken to will talk about the confidence that they've gained from being part of GEM. So somebody this year said to me that volunteering and education opportunities break the cycle. Otherwise, I'm dealing with it in my own head and in my own four walls. And having someone to talk to deals with the panic attacks and is essential. And it's a long process to get well and to get work. And I have to be pushed as well. GEM is good as there are no deadlines and it's about connection versus isolation. So as I say, generally the sort of overall positives that I hear often time and time again is that participants report an increased confidence and sense of purpose. They feel more positive about themselves and they feel that there are reduced barriers to obtaining help and advice. The organisations themselves who have a navigator developer working with them, they can see how beneficial GEM is and how beneficial it is in terms of engaging with their target groups. So they actually have fed back that they can see how their organisational practices can learn from this. And in addition, they are seeing great benefits as how their organisation reaches out to their local community. A couple of real highlights that I've heard over the years has been the fact that the project has this pot of funding called the Extra Mile Fund. And it's a very straightforward way for participants to access some additional funding to undertake some training or other aspirations that they have. So that's been something that's been really welcome during the years. And the other thing is there is a participants council. And this is also seen as being very well received and is a very positive initiative. So participants can join this council and actually have a say over certain decisions about how the project is run and is delivered. So one of the members of the Participants Council said to me once that GEM was useful in terms of meeting the team and doing activities, particularly joining the Participants Council. Every 2 months I take part in meetings and we go to different venues in Gloucestershire. I've been on for 21 months and at first I wasn't massively confident, but as time has gone on, I've become more confident speaking my ideas. So we can see how, you know, something like that has really been a cornerstone of success for the project. So as I say, every year we build in time when we're doing the report to talk to the GEM management team about what's coming up. And it's always really encouraging because most of the time when we've produced a report and we've analysed our data, it will just reinforce ideas that are already in the pipeline. So I'll say something and Jason will say, oh, we're already looking at that, Leonie. So that's always really encouraging. So for example, last year we were talking about the cap on the funding for the Extra Mile funding and how, you know, whether there could be any flexibility in that, and that was already under consideration. So as I say, the whole idea of the process evaluation is really to support the project to operate the best that it can and to not stay static because everything's always changing. Next slide, please. And so here we are, we're looking as well at green impact. So one of the requirements for the funder was that if they were going to give the project funding, then they wanted to see that we were committed to running and working in a more sustainable fashion, which is a great ambition. And we just thought, well, how can we do this? So we decided that we would opt into the Green Impact, which is an internationally recognised benchmark tool run by SOS UK. And we really liked it because we could build our own toolkit. So it was very, very relevant for our groups that we were working with. And as part of the GEM service agreement, each of the GEM partner organisations had to commit to achieve silver level accreditation. And so this then gave us an opportunity to report back to our funders to say, well, look, this is what we're doing and this is, you know, the steps that we've taken. So this year's entries have really demonstrated a high level of environmental awareness and commitment to the programme. The results have been really commendable, and we've actually exceeded the original target. So we've had 9 partners have achieved gold. We've had 13 have achieved silver, 1 has got bronze, and 1 is working towards bronze. And we had an award ceremony via Zoom in July in 2020. So I've sort of skipped through that, but I mean, Isabel will tell you it has been a lot of work, and we've been really, really impressed with the commitment that the organisations have actually shown in terms of how they've approached this and how seriously they take this. So it's really, really great to see, and actually it's been a fantastic addition to the project. So just a little word then about 2020. Paul, if you could just move the slide on, and then I'll just finish with this. Obviously, 2020 has been a particularly challenging year due to COVID, but really what we would say at the end of this is that actually it has only really served to strengthen the partnership, because everybody's played their part in responding and making sure that GEM continued to offer support to individuals to help keep them well, to help them prevent social isolation. So the effect of the UK lockdown in March was that the GEM project then transferred onto an online service. The project responded really quickly, and all the sort of tailored one-to-one support started to be conducted via Zoom or by telephone calls. The GEM office set up a whole programme of online support called GEM Online, which is still running now. And this is like a weekly programme of support that they publish on the website. And then in addition, they also overcame the sort of barrier that some participants had in terms of accessing technology by delivering laptops to people, which was absolutely fantastic. So talking a little bit more about GEM Online, this comprehensive programme offered employment support, there was interview practice, there was a whole employment seminar, loads of wellbeing activities such as Friday art, meditation, yoga. It's been wonderful, and it's been great to enable the Navigator developers to try and help participants to get some structure, particularly when we had the 3 months of being, you know, at home on our own. So, and then since lockdown ended, many aspects of the sort of programme, the online, have continued, and they continue to work really well. And some face-to-face work had resumed and also sort of picked up and started to operate as before, which was great. So I think generally we've had some really fantastic feedback, and in terms of the feedback I've had from participants, of particular note this year has been the support that people have felt towards their emotional well-being. So that has been really, really central. And I think this generally has been quite difficult, particularly with people who have anxiety and other severe mental health issues, that this year's been particularly challenging. So it's been wonderful to see that GEM has been a lifeline to so many, and has coupled, you know, that support along with, you know, overcoming particular barriers such as the need for IT support. And one of the things that I was really struck by was how internally the project reorganised itself in terms of its internal communication systems, which actually just were massively improved, and the cooperation between all of the partners really shone through. So in the first stages, I think there was a lot of activity around crisis support, you know, for particularly families who might have been struggling with food, and they really mobilised to try and help out. So that was fantastic to hear, and just massively encouraging. So really a big well done to GEM this year. Okay, I think that might be me. Thank you.
I think that's you, Leonie. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, just picking up from that, that's been really one of our main focuses this year, is just really highlighting and helping the GEM management team really to highlight and celebrate the fact that GEM has, you know, overnight when the lockdown hit, became a program that was focused on the well-being and the welfare of participants, not just their employment, you know, and that agility and that resilience we've really tried to highlight. Anyway, you've got some context there. I'm just returning to this evaluation model, which has been kind of our guiding light, really. But my main point, which Leonie has already made, actually, is that the outcomes evaluation and the process evaluation, although initially, we kind of, we saw them as separate, but actually they're not at all. They really kind of work together, and hopefully that, that comes through. You'll get a sense of it here, but it definitely comes through the reports, one of which we're literally just about to finish and is going to press in December. So there is some kind of hot off the press stuff here as well. So in the same way, the summative evaluation, we tend to call it an outcomes evaluation because it's kind of easier to understand. So what is that? Well, we're basically, ultimately just trying to examine the outcomes and the impact of GEM with the aim of determining its overall effectiveness. And we're really, as Leonie's already said, have focused throughout this thing on how GEM has changed people's lives, really. So, we focused on the outcomes as opposed to the outputs. The outputs are important. The funders, they want to see a certain number of targets met in terms of employment placements, people going on training courses, all that kind of thing. And that has been monitored, and we include it in our reports as well. But really, what we've said all along is, okay, somebody goes to a training course, what has happened to their life? How are things improving for them? And actually, the impacts are massive on a personal level for people. So we've really had to push the boundaries, really, in the evaluation to pick up on that. It's mixed methods. So we've looked at this quantitatively and qualitatively, and we've basically framed the whole evaluation around the idea of an SRI framework, which I'll say more about in a moment. I'll come back to these things, but it includes a social outcomes distance travelled survey, which we've had over 1,000 responses to in total, and it includes a range of what we've called inclusive evaluation approaches, these more kind of creative approaches that Leonie was talking about. And I'm going to just tell you briefly about those really today: digital storytelling and peer researcher and some other creative approaches that we've used. So this is the theory of change. When I think back to how this project started, the actual evaluation started really with a kind of World Cafe event in Gloucester, where we got as many stakeholders together as we could. I can't remember off the top of my head, but there must have been around 50 there, I should think. And in the spirit of SRI, we were trying to get as many kind of types of stakeholder there. There were people that had been involved in the bidding process. There were people involved in the management. There were NAV devs, there were their managers, and there were other people kind of on the periphery of the project. At that stage, I think I'm right in saying, Leonie, there weren't really that many participants. I think we had a couple there, and we felt pleased that they were there. But what we were trying to do in that event really was to ask these stakeholders to have a really careful think about what the outcomes of GEM could be and to map them out. And this produced this diagram, which is basically included in all of our reports, and we refer back to it, and we try and, I know that's very difficult to see, you can't really see the text there, but those outcomes are the kind of things that we've been, trying to gather data on. But of course, as Leonie said, going back, actually, the very first attempt at having a think about what the outcomes of GEM would be was during the bidding process. In fact, we put together a big spreadsheet of various themes and various outcomes, and that was our initial outcomes map. So we had this kind of more academically grounded outcomes map. We then went to the stakeholders and did this. It was more than a validation exercise. A lot of the outcomes came out of the theory of change, but because we'd had that backdrop, it was really interesting and useful for us to kind of validate it in our own minds. So we've had a fair amount of confidence, I should say, really, in the fact that we think we've measured the right outcomes. And we've also got confidence in the fact that, we measured the right outcomes in the right way, because what really came out of this theory of change event as well, was that we were going to have to reach out to the extremities of what is really it's a harder to reach group. You've heard a bit about it, of people. But in order to have a good evaluation, we were going to have to reach out as far into that group as we possibly could. So, you know, we've had challenges with collecting data from this group of participants. We've had even more challenges in trying to say, well, we don't want to just skirt around the edges. We need to get into it pretty deeply. And that came out of that event right back on December the 7th, 2016. Okay, so like I say, we basically framed the evaluation around SRI. Why did we do that? Well, we wanted to do an evaluation that really fitted with the spirit of GEM. Now, GEM is a social inclusion program, ultimately. It's employment inclusivity, but ultimately we're talking about social inclusion. So SRI is stakeholder driven, which fits with that kind of inclusive co-production idea of GEM. And like I say, it's also focused on outcomes. And it was clear right at the bidding stage that a focus on outcomes was going to be a prerequisite, really, for a successful program like GEM. For those of you who don't know, SRI is a government recognised framework. It does allow a benefit to investment ratio to be calculated, which I'll tell you more about, and it's triple bottom line. So how did we gather data from this group of people? This is one of the ways we've done it. This is our distance travelled survey, which includes 12 questions, which are set out as statements. So the outcome change is basically distance travelled. So when a participant is inducted onto the programme, they complete this survey. They then complete it again when they exit the programme, and also quite a few of them have completed it at a midpoint in their journey. So this time round, we've had about 700 people that have completed this survey at least twice, and some of them actually have completed it more than twice. So ultimately, this is the principal way that we've collected the data to inform the SRI model. Has been through various iterations, this survey. I mean, it has had its ups and downs, I have to say, in trying to get the NAV devs on board with it and so on. But actually, I think in the end, we've come up with what is, you know, a workable, accessible survey. We've had to be very careful about language and accessibility. And in fact, the survey has been greatly improved since Fahima joined the M&E team. She's worked on it a lot, and actually, because she was a GEM participant herself, she was able to actually point out various things about the language and the ambiguities of some of the questions. So, you know, it has, in a very real and very useful way, actually been an exercise in co-production, and I think, you know, we can say that with some confidence. So I'm going to take you a bit more into the survey now. Some of the outcomes listed on the left come from the original outcomes map. They come from the theory of change. And the middle column there shows you the survey questions, the survey statements that we've used to kind of measure change in those outcomes. So some of them are composites. I think only 2 of them actually. So if you take the top one, improved sense of competence, engagement and purpose, which I think Leonie has already mentioned, that's come out quite strongly in the kind of more qualitative narrative-based stuff. In the SRI model, using the survey, we actually measure change in that outcome, which is a kind of well-being outcome. You'll find it in the kind of ONS, probably well-being measures. We've measured it through 2 questions, through 2 statements. I often get a chance to learn new things, and I feel that I'm making a difference in my life. The change score for that this year was 32%, and actually the top 2 there, so competence and purpose and reduced barriers to receiving help and advice, they've both consistently, right back to early 2017, they've consistently come out as the top outcomes, which, you know, I think helps to validate GEM as a program, but also in a sense it helps to validate, you know, our method really in our survey, the fact that, you know, we must be doing something right, because over 1,000 people have completed this thing, and these two things keep coming out top. So if you just look down, we'll just have a look down the outcomes. There are other outcomes include things like resilience and self-esteem. We're looking at the financial situation of participants, their employability, physical and mental health, social isolation. And you can see there just the ways that in that snapshot survey, which has had necessarily to be relatively simple and quick to complete, we've managed to gather a lot of data to evidence change in those outcomes. Okay, so there's the bit of alchemy that SRI does. We've basically done a forecast SRI model. So we explored the change in the theory of change. We've measured the change in the outcomes principally using this survey, but bear in mind and always remember with this evaluation, what we've been doing right the way through it is really triangulating all the data. So we've triangulated that survey data with all this other narrative and all the stories and stuff. But we've done a forecast SRI we obviously applied financial proxies to the outcomes, approximations, so that we could monetize it. The first time we did it, it was forecasting. So this was sort of summer 2017, something like that. It was forecasting that GEM would, over the course of its life, return £1.57 back to the county and back to society for every pound invested. It's gradually crept up, and actually, you know, it then jumped, partly because anyway, well, it's been improving all the time, but it also jumped because there was some extra funding. So GEM has continued for another 2 years. And now the estimate of the forecast model is that it will generate about £2.50 for every pound invested. And next year, that forecast model for the first time will become an evaluative model, and which is the model we will seek to publish. So this is, just wanted to give you a few headlines really. And I thought the best way actually was, this is hot off the press. In fact, Colin finished this infographic yesterday and sent it to me. So I thought, why not put it in the presentation? When we produce interim reports, evaluation reports, we normally produce an infographic or two as well to help the GEM management team like it. And it helps them to kind of really get across in a simple way, you know, what the impacts of GEM has been. So we've really tried to highlight in this one, we've tried to show that this idea that GEM has been, you know, it's been agile and resilient in meeting the needs of its participants through the COVID-19 pandemic, kind of rapid response idea. It has been consistently successful in improving the competence, engagement and purpose and other motivational attributes of participants, and also in reducing the barriers to help and advice, which has been a massive thing for participants really. And for the first time, it's also highlighted differences, or our analysis has highlighted differences in the trajectory of outcome change with respect to characteristics such as gender, disability, ethnicity, and even the length of time that participants have been on the programme. So for example, what we found is that the outcome, the distance travelled, has been greater for participants who've been on the GEM programme for between 3 and 6 months compared to all other timeframes. And obviously that, you know, that has implications. It allows the management team to step back and have a think about what that means, but not only in terms of, you know, what they're doing in delivering, managing the programme, but also, you know, how does that kind of influence, you know, ideas for future programmes that might be a successor to GEM. So that's part one of our infographic. So I'm going to talk about a bit more about the inclusive evaluation. Now, we've done quite a lot really developing this. We piloted quite a few methods. I won't talk about them here because there's not really enough time. I just wanted to really give you a flavour of this across two of them. One is a peer researcher approach, whereby participants have literally interviewed each other. And this work has been led by Fahima. In fact, so that's how we met Fahima. She was a participant on GEM. She got involved in this peer researcher approach and basically ended up taking it over and leading it, analysing it and writing it up. It's involved about 12 to 14, I think 14 actually, in-depth interviews, which were transcribed and analysed in NVivo. And this slide just shows, I mean, there's a 20-page report on this alone, and we're about to actually submit this to a journal, just this part of the evaluation. This slide just shows the three themes that came out. So, and again, you'll hear, you know, this resonates with some of the process stuff that Leonie has already talked about. The perceived navigator developer support. So that's things like job-related support, career planning, just helping participants to pursue their goals. It has provided incredible psychological support and emotional support. You know, you've had a case where a nav dev has been paired up with a participant to try and get them closer to employment training or volunteering or whatever it's been, but actually, you know, beyond that, it's massively changed people's lives. They've been able to make progress as individuals, and this whole idea of kind of personal development and self-improvement really came out of this peer researcher approach. So they've been, it's had impacts on their anxiety levels. They've become more outgoing. They've built up confidence and actually just being more optimistic about their career, but also about their lives generally. And the third theme is all about the way that it's just made their lives more meaningful and their day-to-day lives more meaningful. You know, getting out there, doing voluntary work, going on courses, attending training events, and all that kind of thing has meant that they've, you know, they've had more social interaction. There's been more social participation. They've got more time structure to their lives. All this has kind of impacts on their psychological and their physical health and well-being. So all of that, I can't do it justice here, but it's all really come out of that peer researcher. And our thoughts were, is that if we got the participants to speak to each other, they would actually be more candid. I mean, it had its, in terms of research method, it had its challenges, believe me, but, you know, they would speak more candidly and they would use freer language than they would with us. And I think that really has worked. Okay, the second bit I'm just going to tell you a bit about, this is Ab Gardner's work. We brought her in because we wanted to really deepen this idea. You know, it's ultimately, as Leonie said, it's about the participant stories. So the way that digital storytelling works is that participants bring along an image or photograph or a few photographs, not many, 2 or 3 maybe, to a workshop that are very personal to them. And in this case, they were asked to bring photographs that were obviously, you know, relevant, personal to them, but personal to their GEM journey. There was a series of workshops. I think there were 2 on this occasion. One is where the idea of a script, a personal script by the participant is developed. So obviously they've got to understand the methodology and what it is they're getting into and so on. And then the second one, they actually script it. So that is a recording of in their own words, their voice, using these images, these photographs that they brought as a kind of still behind it. So it's not a video, it's quite a different thing actually. And it's a very powerful way of getting across participant experiences, but also actually it's an empowering methodology. Because in very simple terms, as you go through this methodology, the power shifts from the facilitator, in this case it's been Ab Gardner, shifts from the facilitator to the participant. So by the end of it, they're feeling pretty good about themselves. They're, you know, it's helping to give them self-esteem And it's a kind of personal development thing as well, really. So again, we tried to make the evaluation, co-produced as much as possible. And actually here you could almost say we're co-producing the impacts of the programme as well. So I can't show you the actual digital stories today. One thing we just need to double check on the kind of ethical position of that. What I can show you is just a couple of the images that we used. So one participant, for example, did a stained glass window course as part of their GEM journey. And his story really is a story of journeying from reluctance, from reservation, to leadership, to achievement, and to improving his confidence, which really illustrates the power of the digital storytelling in spotlighting that individual impact. I mean, it's a highly, again, I can't really do it justice without showing it to you, but it's a highly personal, emotive story, but really, best way of putting it, really kind of brings together a lot of it, literally does triangulate a lot of the other stuff that we've collected in a really meaningful, powerful way. Similarly, another participant revealed how GEM had really helped this person to reconfigure their life goals and their expectations. And the story in this case was, was quite specific and very emotive about family, about substance misuse, about crime and all sorts of things. But, the role of this individual's journey on GEM in kind of alleviating that and coming through it was really quite powerful. Okay. So moving on from the inclusive stuff, although it's all inclusive, to be honest, now we're moving away from participants to looking at the partnership. There are over 30 organizations involved in this thing. It's actually massive if you think about it. To actually engage individuals and organizations in one program that has a common goal has been a major achievement. And the more we got through the evaluation cycle, the more we realized actually we're going to need to pick up on this and report it formally as part of the evaluation at the end of 2021. So a more recent addition to the GEM methodological party is this partnership assessment. Now, this being led by Colin Baker of the School and Sport and Exercise, who's on the call with us today. And the diagram here really shows the themes that have emerged from some initial online workshops that Colin did over the summer. And this was really to explore the experiences and the perceptions of the partnership and help develop a logic model. This isn't the logic model here, but it's in our most recent report. And that partnership logic model will kind of sit alongside our theory of change. It will, there may be a way that we can actually map it onto it to show that ultimately none of this would have happened unless these people had really engaged in a meaningful way. So the themes there are macro themes. In this case, the whole lockdown and COVID thing has been a massive macro kind of impact on GEM. There's the importance of shared learning and communication. There's other organizational stuff around decision making, the paperwork. There's always endless comments about the GEM paperwork, but at the end of the day, people do it. But obviously, it's been a way. It's been a journey in kind of managing that and making sure that it gets done. And then, of course, organizations and projects and programs and anything are made up of individuals. So this partnership assessment will also drill right down into the individual level. If people aren't really invested in it or they don't have enough empathy with it, it's just not going to work. So that's just giving you a flavor really of a partnership assessment that will be developed further next year. So part 2 of our 2020 infographic. I'm not going to take you through that. Just have a look at it. You'll see the bottom right hand corner. We've got our first bit of headline findings from the partnership assessment I've just spoken about. The word cloud at the top there, that's just some of the words and the phrases that came out of the peer researcher work. And actually, I mean, there's some brilliant quotes there as well, which obviously, you know, we've included in there's a full technical report this year, about 70 pages. There's an accompanying 15 to 20 page summary report. And like I say, this peer researcher work will be the first of hopefully 4 or 5 fairly distinct journal articles that we'll look to write over the course of next year and the year after to kind of intellectualize all this stuff. So as we look forward from the 2020 evaluation cycle, our attention really is necessarily turning more towards what's going to happen post-GEM. Obviously, we're trying to inform what happens in its latter stages, and but an important role for the evaluation really is to help inform potentially the design of a successor to GEM, and also to put forward recommendations on how the GEM experience can inform and influence what happens nationally. There's one thing GEM has proved actually is that an inclusive and tailored approach is considerably more preferable to the usual kind of one-size-fits-all approach of DWP, Department of Work and Pensions, which are literally just trying to get people off benefits into employment. There's a lot more to it than that, as GEM has shown. So what's next for the GEM evaluation? Well, the evaluation cycle will continue. It'll continue to focus on learning and bringing out the lessons for GEM, but also this post-GEM environment. Alongside the programme, it will remain flexible and agile in response to the current situation. I mean, who knows what's going to happen in the new year? None of us know. So, but we've obviously had to go in lockstep as much as we can with the programme. We'll be producing, as well as the SRI model, some doing a kind of case study cost-benefit analysis approach to really highlight and evidence cost savings to the state, as well as the kind of social value that we've evidenced. We'll look at bringing cost savings to the state firmly into that. We'll do the partnership assessment, as I've said. We'll continue with the inclusive evaluation methods. They're going to be some of these early pilots, these creative approaches that I haven't really talked about. They're going to dovetail with the digital storytelling side of things. And we'll also be doing a formal analysis of mental health. One thing I neglected to say when I talked about the survey is that we've now got, as well as our 12 to 15 questions that are bespoke questions that we've developed over the years. We've now included a statement of 14, I think it is, mental health statements from the Warwick Edinburgh Mental Wellbeing Scale, and we will be doing a formal analysis of mental health impacts of GEM towards the end of next year, middle of next year. Right, that's it. Any questions?
Well, thank you very much, Paul and Leonie. That was really fascinating to see what you've done during the past years. And it's a very complex evaluation, so I appreciate that you needed more time to sort of explain what's going on, because there are so many stages to it. It's not that easy to explain within a very short evaluation what's been going on. We have a few questions. I'm very cautious of the time because we are sort of nearly finishing, but I think it would be very good to ask a couple of questions that have been in the chat, and I think it would be good to sort of touch upon them and get some participants. I don't know, Julie, whether you would like to sort of take over or.
Well, there's a few. Some of them have been.
Questions.
some of them have been answered already in the chat, but Beth had one. I don't know if you're still there, Beth. The deep hanging out method sounds really intriguing and useful. Can you give a bit more information about it, especially from the standpoint of ethics?
Yeah, so obviously we had to run all of the approaches through the ethics committee before we started. With the deep hanging out, I would always, you know, the meetings would all be arranged through the Navigator developers, and they always explained to the participants, you know, why I was going. And I would always explain that at the outset, but sometimes it was possible. I would have recorded the interview, and then at the end of the interview would have said, I've recorded this, is that okay? And they would either say, yes, you can keep that recording, or no, you have to delete it. And we have a letter that we gave to everybody who took part in the interviews, and explained all about the evaluation with all our contact details on, and then they would sign the consent form. So all of that paperwork was always done at the end. And at that point, that would be where I say, oh, I've recorded the discussion we've had, and I may like to anonymise and lift some quotes. Is that possible? And they would either say yes or no, and I would either delete it there and then or not. And I never had anybody ask me to delete the recording. It wasn't always possible to do it like that, and you know, it feels like a little bit of an awkward way to approach it, but I think it's just the idea that you are in a more relaxed way with people, and you get more kind of useful feedback. Whereas if you're sort of sitting down with a clipboard in front of someone, and you know, you kind of get into all the formalities of the paperwork at the outset, sometimes that just can completely change the actual interview and discussion. It feels like an interview, it doesn't feel like a chat, and it doesn't feel like you're just hanging out. And really we wanted it to be more like hanging out. So yeah, but we were very, very careful to manage that very carefully in terms of the ethics. So yeah, any comments on that, Beth? Would be interested to know what you think. Is she still on the call?
Yeah, I am still here. Thanks, that's really helpful. I just wasn't sure in terms of, yeah, like whether or not it was done up front, and then how that would impact sort of getting into the deep hanging out, or if it was done, so it sounds like it was done afterward. And I didn't realize the role that then the Navigator developer would have within that, because I think that role is super interesting as well, around, you know, like how do you select those people, how are they trained up, and the really important role that they play. So yeah, I love this. This is fantastic. Thank you.
Well, I mean, I have to say that it was really Wendy that encouraged us to do that particular sort of style of it. And at first I was like, oh, I can't do that. I can't just secretly record somebody without telling them up front. But then when I tried it once, I was like, I see why you want us to do this. It is a totally different way of gathering research, and actually it did work really well. But it was definitely not possible all the time, you know, because I wasn't always in situations where I got to do gardening and whittling, sadly. Sometimes I had to sit down.
Simon, I don't know if you're still there. You raised an interesting point about the scale and the level of investment.
Hi, yes, I'm still here, and it's a very interesting presentation. Thank you very much, because as someone who works partly on the other side of the fence with lots of National Lottery Heritage Fund projects, skills for the future, and inclusion, and all the laudable aims at the start are very similar, but it was about how big is the overall project and the impact in terms of number of individuals. And then probably following on from that, is there, because I like the idea of the project scaffolding, is there a sort of like a minimum level of investment that you need for something like this to build the project and the appropriate project scaffolding?
Well, thank you very much, Jason, for contributing the actual stats. So if you look on the chat, he has actually put those figures in, which is fantastic. Minimum amounts needed for scaffolding. I think one of the things that I've picked up, and this might not answer the question, but the ways that the project has been really successful has been that there has been a sort of standard amount of funding given to each of the partner organisations that have joined in, which has meant that there's not been any squabbles about the funding. It's been so equitably applied that has been an enormous strength to the project. The actual amounts in terms of how much would be needed to sort of give that scaffolding, to give that support to the community and voluntary sector organisations, I honestly wouldn't know, but I don't know if Jason wanted to comment. It'd be nice to hear Jason comment on something, or Paul, if you want to chip in.
Yeah, it'd be good if Jason did, but all I would say is that, one of the things towards the end there, I was saying that, we've looked at the difference in the kind of outcome change and the distance travelled for participants, depending on how long they've been engaged in the programme. And actually, if you look at the data, it's that 3 to 6 month window. So maybe you could say that actually a lot of personal change as a result of a programme like this is going to happen, say, within a 9 month kind of window, and maybe that could help guide things. But beyond that, I wouldn't want any hostages to fortune at my door, I should say.
Hi everyone. Hi Leonie, Paul.
Hi.
I mean, just on the numbers that I put in the chat, it's roughly I think just under 3k per participant on the programme as a whole project, and that calculation has been distributed across England, so that without going through the whole process, that we're part of a wider national programme, Building Better Opportunities, it's called. So our overall targets and of participants and the outcomes that they're expected to achieve is roughly in line with all other projects across the country. How we do that and how we deliver that has been down to us, and we've been fortunate to have a lot of flexibility to adapt to the situation in Gloucestershire, our partnership, and where our priorities lie.
Thanks, Jason.
But if that answers your question, but it's a bit more about the money, 3k per person.
Thanks, that's very helpful.
Thank you, Simon, for the question.
Okay, that's one last question from Janet. Janet, do you want to ask this rather than me reading out your text here?
Okay, thanks, Julie. Yeah, it's really because it's something that I've come across when trying to interview people, when you want to put them at ease, or asking them to do a survey when their time might be limited, or you want to kind of create a positive atmosphere to help with a response being considered and careful. There's also this kind of tension about when you're supposed to be designing surveys, you're supposed to offer as many negatives as positives for scoring against, and you're supposed to sort of, do various conventional things to avoid unintentional survey design bias influencing results. And I just wondered, with your core survey, do you have negative questions in there as well as the positives? Because given the people you're working with, you could imagine, with people with mental health issues, negative questions could actually kind of make it more difficult for you to get them to respond. So I just didn't know how you dealt with things like that, Paul, whether you follow the standard protocols and you do this kind of reversing the sense of the question in order to make sure they're not always scoring, significantly agree, and sometimes they have to say significantly disagree.
Yeah, I mean, it's obviously a really good question, Janet, in terms of methodology. I mean, the truth is that we have it, we experimented with a few different questions. We did have a couple of negatively phrased questions, and we ended up in a survey that worked, that we could tell was going to work, with the vast majority of them phrased positively, because like you say, we had to avoid confusion while they're completing it. At the same time, we had to kind of find a mechanism and a way of making sure that the vast majority would complete this thing when they already had another load of paperwork to complete. So it features as part of the kind of induction pack, and there's stuff in there on goal setting, there's administrative stuff and all sorts. So we really went through the mill actually in working with the NAV devs. We had to get the NAV devs on board with it to start with, because they were going to be the ones that were ultimately going to be there when the participants completed it. That's usually the way it works. And we went through various iterations, and once we got the NAV devs on board and they could see that actually it was part of a much kind of bigger evaluation, where we were really, ultimately, we just want to listen to the participants, but we wanted to evidence the change as best we can. And I think to get even 700, double entered, entry and exit distance travel surveys in an evaluation like this is, you know, we at the end of the day, probably we've done well. But there are methodological issues. Just one other thing to say is that next year, FAHEMA is going to do a factor analysis. Well, we've already done one actually. We're going to do it, try and publish it, a factor analysis of the questions, and try and develop them into a scale that could be used, you know, or could feature in other kind of evaluations of social inclusion programs. So our kind of, you know, intellectualization of it, as it were, is happening next year and the year after.
Yeah, thanks. That is really helpful, because yeah, I think there are issues here about how you do this, especially when you're dealing with issues where you're trying to work with people who themselves are vulnerable or sensitive. You have to think very carefully about whether the normal rules about data gathering should apply in the same way with different groups of people. Because, you know, I've had that experience of running a survey and finding that actually you just confuse people as much as you get from them, because you've turned questions around, or you've played around with things in a way which has in the end just made them rather angry with what the, you know, the purpose of the thing seems to be. So anyway, that was useful for getting that feeling from you.
Yeah.
I wondered whether the work in Edinburgh mental health and wellbeing scale around that, and whether it's acceptable in that domain.
Well, we'll be able to tell you in about 6 months' time, but our initial look at the data and the way people are engaging with it, it's actually more positive than perhaps we thought it would be at the start. So I'm quietly confident about that. And also it's going to be interesting to actually do an analysis where we put that Warwick Edinburgh data together with our social outcomes data and see some of the patterns that come out. So that's all it's all to play for.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
Good. I think.
Well, thank you very much. I'm afraid
you.
that's what we've got time for at the moment, but thank you very much for a very interesting presentation. I know that we could spend much more time discussing this because there are so many angles to this. Hopefully, you know, once the evaluation is finished, we'll have you know, a chance to have another presentation to look at the overall program. But thanks a lot, and thank you very much to everyone that participated today. Just as a heads up, we have another seminar on the 15th of January. It's Alison Coffin from the Cardiff University, and it's about sort of intensive livestock farming and perhaps the impact of leisure and tourism, specifically in Shropshire and Herefordshire. So it's another presentation looking at completely different things. So hope that we'll see as many of you as possible on the 14th of January. And thank you very much, and have a nice rest of the day. Bye.
Thank you, Katerina.
Thank you,
everybody.
Thanks.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.